There are movies that entertain, movies that inspire, and then there are movies that carve themselves so deeply into our culture that they become myths. The Wizard of Oz is one of those rare stories. On screen, it was all color, music, and wonder. But behind the curtains, it was danger, drama, and near disaster. Every ruby slipper step was shadowed by chaos. And here's the wildest part. If just a few tiny decisions had gone differently, the movie we all remember might never have existed. So grab your popcorn, buckle in, and don't blink. Because today, we're diving into the secrets behind one of cinema's most iconic films. Here are 20 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up.
Number 1.
When most people think of Dorothy Gale, they think of Judy Garland, standing wide-eyed in that blue gingham dress, singing her way into movie history. But what if I told you she almost never got the part? In L. Frank Baum's original book, Dorothy was a child, only about 8 years old. So naturally, MGM executives thought of the ultimate child star of the era, Shirley Temple. She had the fame, the charm, the all-American smile. The studio dreamed of cashing in on its massive popularity. But when it came down to one thing, her voice, Temple couldn't quite carry the emotional weight of Over the Rainbow. The song demanded maturity, raw feeling, and heartbreak, something Temple simply didn't have at such a young age. Enter Judy Garland. At 16, she was older, but her voice, deep, soulful, aching, was undeniable. MGM still panicked that she looked too mature, so they forced her into strict diets, even binding her chest to make her appear younger. It was cruel. But thanks to director George Cukor, who told her to be herself, the film struck gold. Garland wasn't Dorothy because of her age. She was Dorothy because she embodied her heart. And that authenticity is what still moves audiences today.
Number 2.
The success of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937 sent shockwaves through Hollywood. An animated fairy tale had earned millions during the Great Depression, no less. MGM executives panicked. If Disney could turn fantasy into gold, they needed their own magical empire. So they dusted off The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, a book already beloved across generations, and decided to turn it into their Snow White-sized rival. Big songs, bright colors, a wholesome heroine. But here's the twist. MGM didn't greenlight the project out of love for the story. They did it out of envy. They wanted what Disney had, no matter the cost. Ironically, the film flopped in its original release. It didn't make money until years later when it aired on television. Proof that chasing trends rarely pays off. But taking risks can create legends. And hey, speaking of risks, if you're enjoying these behind-the-curtain secrets, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you wild stories like this one.
Number 3.
Picture the booming voice of the wizard, the smoke, the booming fire, the man behind the curtain. Now imagine if he'd been played by W.C. Fields, one of the most famous comedians of the 1930s. Originally, MGM offered Fields the role. He had the bluster, the humor, and the stage presence. But there was a catch. He demanded $75,000, a fortune at the time. The studio said no. Instead, the role went to Frank Morgan, a less flashy choice. But here's the brilliance. Morgan didn't just play the wizard. He played 5 characters in the movie: the doorman, the coachman, the guard at the Emerald City gates, all disguises leading up to the big reveal. It wasn't just a clever casting trick. It reinforced the theme of the movie itself. Appearances can disappoint. The great and powerful wizard wasn't a mighty sorcerer at all. He was just a man, hiding in plain sight.
Number 4.
When you think of the Wicked Witch of the West, you picture Margaret Hamilton, green skin, hook nose, and that unforgettable cackle. But she wasn't the first choice. MGM first tested another actress, Gail Sondergaard, in glamorous gowns and sparkling makeup. Their idea? Make the witch mysterious and alluring, more like a sorceress than a monster. But executives quickly pulled the plug. They didn't believe audiences would accept a beautiful witch. Sondergaard refused to be made grotesque, and she walked away. That's when Hamilton stepped in. Her sharp profile, piercing voice, and willingness to endure heavy prosthetics created one of the most iconic villains in film history. It's chilling to think. We could have had a stylish enchantress. Instead, we got a nightmare figure that haunted generations.
Number 5.
In Baum's original book, Dorothy's shoes were silver, not Ruby. But silver didn't pop against the yellow brick road in Technicolor. So screenwriter Noel Langley suggested Ruby. Red glitter would blaze across the screen like fire, dazzling audiences in a way silver never could. The gamble worked. When Judy Garland clicked her heels 3 times, the ruby slippers didn't just shimmer, they became immortal. More than props, they became symbols of hope, home, and magic. Decades later, when adaptations like The Wiz tried to restore them to silver, it didn't matter. Ruby had already become legend.
Number 6.
Playing the Wicked Witch of the West was more than just acting for Margaret Hamilton. It was survival. In one scene, Hamilton was supposed to make a dramatic exit. She would vanish in a puff of smoke, slipping through a hidden trapdoor while sparks and flames exploded around her. It looked terrifying on screen, but what happened behind the scenes was even scarier. The trapdoor jammed. Hamilton was trapped on stage as the pyrotechnics went off. Her face was covered in copper-based green makeup, flammable and toxic. When the fire roared too close, the chemical mixture ignited instantly. Flames scorched her chin and cheeks, leaving her with second-degree burns. Worse, her hand caught fire, leaving her with third-degree burns that took months to heal. Hamilton was rushed to the hospital. Her return to set weeks later came with one demand: no more fire stunts. But the story didn't end there. Her stunt double, Betty Danko, later took her place for another explosive broomstick sequence. The broom's pipe malfunctioned, blowing up beneath her and sending her crashing down with serious injuries. She too ended up hospitalized. On screen, the Wicked Witch seemed untouchable. Off-screen, both women paid in blood and pain to bring that illusion to life.
Number 7.
The Tin Man may have been searching for a heart, but for the actors playing him, the costume nearly stopped their lungs. The role was first given to Buddy Ebsen. To create the metallic look, makeup artists brushed her skin with pure aluminum powder. It looked shiny under the bright lights, but the danger was invisible. Ebsen inhaled the particles until his lungs began to shut down. He collapsed and was rushed to the hospital, unable to breathe. Doctors found his lungs coated in toxic aluminum dust. MGM quietly replaced him with Jack Haley, but even Haley wasn't safe. The aluminum was reformulated into a paste smeared across his face daily. It caused painful infections around his eyes that lingered long after filming. To audiences, the Tin Man was a lovable figure desperate for a heart. For the men who wore the costume, it was a brush with death.
Number 8.
Imagine stepping onto set in a costume that weighed nearly 90 pounds and was made from real lion pelts. That was the daily reality for Burt Lahr, who played the Cowardly Lion. The heavy suit trapped heat under the blistering Technicolor lights, which reached 100 degrees or more. Inside, Lahr would sweat so much that by the end of filming days, the costume had to be hung up to dry, sometimes still dripping wet. Between takes, crew members shoved air hoses into the suit just to give him a breath of cool relief. Even then, he often staggered under the weight. On screen, the Cowardly Lion was timid, whimpering, and afraid of everything. Off-screen, it took enormous strength and endurance just to stand upright in that unbearable suit. It was a cruel irony. The weakest character required the toughest performance.
Number 9.
For Ray Bolger, who played the Scarecrow, the role came with a painful price. His whimsical face, stitched with burlap-like features, wasn't a simple mask. It was made of heavy latex prosthetics glued tightly to his skin. Under the hot studio lights, the glue melted and fused with his flesh. At the end of each day, the mask had to be peeled off. Imagine ripping duct tape off your skin. Except every single night, for months, his face was left raw and bleeding. By the time filming wrapped, grooves were etched into his skin around his mouth and chin. Some never fully faded. Even years later, faint scars were still visible, souvenirs of a role that had literally carved itself into his body. The Scarecrow was meant to be a man stuffed with straw. Instead, he was a man scarred by Hollywood magic.
Number 10.
The dreamy poppy field sequence looked like magic. Dorothy and her friends collapsed under a gentle snowstorm, while Glinda the Good Witch saved the day. But those flakes drifting down, they weren't snowing. They weren't even fake movie snow. They were asbestos, a toxic mineral that at the time Hollywood used freely because it was cheap and looked beautiful on camera. The actors laughed and played while being showered in poisonous fibers. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Lion, and even Judy Garland herself were coated in it, inhaling the dust without knowing the danger. Today, we know asbestos exposure causes serious illness. Back then, it was treated like harmless stage glitter. On film, it looks like a winter wonderland. Behind the scenes, it was deadly theater.
Number 11.
In the film, the Wicked Witch's flying monkeys are mischievous, cackling creatures swooping through the skies. To audiences, they were funny, scary, and unforgettable. But for the men who played them, it was pure terror. These monkeys weren't animated or drawn. They were stuntmen strapped into harnesses, suspended by thin piano wires over massive sound stages. As they dangled and swooped, some wires snapped. Imagine falling from dozens of feet in the air, only to hit a hard wooden floor below. That's exactly what happened to more than one stunt performer. Broken bones, bruises, injuries, all hidden from the public. MGM quietly patched up the accidents, terrified that bad press could sink their already chaotic production. For the world, the monkeys were comic relief. For the men in those furry suits, every flight was a gamble with gravity.
Number 12.
Most films have one director, sometimes two. The Wizard of Oz had four. First came Richard Thorpe, whose version felt stiff and lifeless. He put Judy Garland in a blonde wig, painted heavy makeup on her face, and made her look nothing like the Dorothy we know. MGM quickly shut him down after 2 weeks. Next came George Cukor, who stripped away the wig, softened Garland's look, and encouraged her to act natural. That one decision, to let Judy be herself, saved the character. But Cukor didn't stay long either. Then came Victor Fleming, a determined, no-nonsense director who brought focus to the sprawling production. But even he didn't last until the end. He was pulled away to another epic, Gone with the Wind. Finally, King Vidor stepped in quietly to finish the sepia-toned Kansas sequences, including the haunting over-the-rainbow scene. In the end, it was a miracle the movie even felt cohesive. What should have been a fairy tale was really a game of Hollywood relay, passed from one director to the next.
Number 13.
Even though Victor Fleming didn't finish The Wizard of Oz, his name still looms over 1939, the year many call the greatest in Hollywood history. Why? Because while Oz was in chaos, MGM loaned him out to direct another troubled production, Gone with the Wind. Think about that. One director, in 1 year, had his fingerprints on two of the most iconic films in history. Both premiered in 1939. Both became defining moments in cinema. No other director before or since has had a year like that, wrangling fantasy on one side and Civil War drama on the other. In 1939, Victor Fleming didn't just direct movies. He reshaped cinema itself, twice.
Number 14.
Behind Dorothy's innocent smile was a teenager under relentless pressure. During one scene, the Cowardly Lion's big dramatic entrance, Bert Lahr roared with all his might. But Garland couldn't stop laughing. "Take after take," she giggled uncontrollably, breaking character. The crew grew frustrated. Director Victor Fleming grew furious. Finally, he pulled Garland aside and slapped her across the face, hard. "Now go in there and work," he ordered. By today's standards, this was abused, plain and simple. But in 1939, it was considered discipline. Garland returned to the set, finished the scene, and didn't laugh again. The audience saw Dorothy's wide-eyed innocence. What they didn't see was a teenager, bullied into obedience by a man twice her age.
Number 15.
Movies today often take months, even years to complete. But for the cast of The Wizard of Oz, 6 months of filming felt like a lifetime. Days began at 4 a.m. and often didn't end until after 7 p.m. 6 days a week under the blazing Technicolor lights that made the set feel like an oven. The costumes were heavy, the makeup toxic, and the work relentless. Judy Garland, barely 16, was pushed into exhaustion, starvation diets, endless rehearsals, and grueling hours. The Cowardly Lion suit weighed nearly 90 pounds. The Tin Man's makeup caused infections. The Scarecrow's mask scarred his skin. Early footage shot under Richard Thorpe was scrapped entirely, meaning weeks of work disappeared, adding even more pressure to an already suffering cast. For audiences, Oz was a magical escape. For the people who made it, it was a nightmare disguised in Technicolor.
Number 16.
It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. The 124 actors who played the Munchkins were each paid $50 a week, less than half of what the dog playing Toto earned. Toto, the little terrier, received $125 a week. Why the difference? Hollywood at the time treated the Munchkin actors as novelty performers rather than professional stars. Many were herded into cramped dressing rooms, given little respect, and kept under strict studio control. Some of them rebelled, drinking heavily or sneaking around the set, which fueled decades of rumors about wild Munchkin parties. Most of those stories were exaggerated, but the unfair pay was real. Think about it. The characters who made Oz magical, the ones who welcomed Dorothy to a world of wonder, were treated as second-class citizens, and the dog had it better.
Number 17.
When you think of The Wizard of Oz, you think of 1939, Judy Garland, and Technicolor brilliance. But Oz existed on screen long before that. The very first adaptation came in 1910, a silent short film with bizarre costumes and strange, dreamlike imagery. In 1925, a feature-length silent version appeared, starring Oliver Hardy, before his Laurel and Hardy fame, as the Tin Woodman. But those films never captured the magic of Baum's books. MGM's 1939 version was the first to fully merge spectacle, music, and heart. It wasn't just another adaptation, it was a reinvention. Without MGM, Oz might have stayed a dusty fairy tale from the silent era. Instead, it became an eternal symbol of cinema itself.
Number 18.
Today, The Wizard of Oz feels like one of Hollywood's biggest successes, but in 1939, it struggled. The film cost nearly $3 million, an enormous budget for the time. And while it did okay at the box office, it wasn't enough to cover its massive production costs. MGM lost money. For years, Oz wasn't seen as a classic. It was just another ambitious project that failed to live up to its price tag. So how did it transform into one of the most beloved films ever? The answer came in 1956 when CBS aired it on television. For the first time, families across America sat down in their living rooms to watch Dorothy's journey unfold together. It became an annual tradition, replayed year after year. Oz didn't conquer the world in theaters. It conquered the world in people's homes.
Number 19.
It's the song that defines the movie, the moment when Judy Garland's voice cracks open the heart, the melody that generations can hum by heart. But during test screenings, MGM executives thought Over the Rainbow slowed the film down. They seriously considered cutting it. Imagine The Wizard of Oz without its signature song. No longing for a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. No anthem of hope sung by a girl in a Kansas barnyard. Fortunately, the song was saved at the last minute, and it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song. More than that, it became one of the most enduring songs of the 20th century. Sometimes the very thing studios think is too slow is the one thing audiences remember forever.
Number 20.
The ruby slippers weren't made to be treasures. They were just 5 pairs of sequined shoes, built by MGM's costume department like any other wardrobe piece. Their only job was to sparkle under the bright Technicolor lights as Dorothy tapped her heels and wished for home. And yet, those shoes would become some of the most valuable movie props in history. After filming wrapped, the slippers vanished into MGM's cavernous costume storage. For decades, they sat collecting dust, just one prop among thousands. Then, in the 1970s, when MGM auctioned off its archives, the slippers began to resurface. One pair landed in the Smithsonian Institution, where they became the museum's most visited exhibit, millions of people staring at the shoes that carried Dorothy home. Another ended up in the hands of private collectors. The slippers weren't just props anymore. They were artifacts of American culture, but not all the stories were magical. In 2005, One pair of ruby slippers was stolen from the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Garland's own hometown. One night, thieves broke a display case and vanished with the shoes in less than a minute. No alarms, no clues, just gone. For over 13 years, the slippers were missing, whispered about like stolen crown jewels. Rumors swirled in the dark world of black market memorabilia. Some said they were destroyed. Others claimed they were hidden away in private vaults. Finally, in 2018, the FBI announced a sting operation had recovered the stolen pair. But here's the twist. The slippers were found, but the thieves were never publicly named. To this day, no one knows exactly who stole them or why. Their value? Estimated at millions of dollars. But their real worth isn't in money, it's in meaning. The ruby slippers are more than sequins and felt. They're symbols of hope, home, and the power of imagination. And the fact that people were willing to risk prison just to possess them proves something. Even decades later, the magic of Oz still casts a spell strong enough to drive people mad.
Bonus.
For all its joy on screen, the story of the Wizard of Oz is shadowed by something darker, a kind of curse. The actors carried scars for life. Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch, lived with burn marks from her accident. Ray Bolger, the Scarecrow, bore faint lines on his face from the mask that tore at his skin. Buddy Ebsen, the original Tin Man, spent the rest of his career reminding people that the role had nearly killed him. And then there was Judy Garland, barely 16. Forced onto diets, fed pep pills to stay awake and sleeping pills to rest, bullied into obedience. She gave the world Dorothy Gale, yet behind the camera, she was unraveling. Garland never fully escaped the pressure. For her, Oz was the role of a lifetime, and also the beginning of a lifelong struggle. Even stranger, the myths surrounding the film grew into their own legends. Some swore there were ghosts hidden in the background, shadowy figures hanging in the forest scenes. Others whispered that the set itself was haunted, cursed by all the accidents and near deaths. Most of those stories are just urban legends, but the truth is almost stranger than the myths. Because what's real is this: cast members were scarred for life. Props meant for fantasy became priceless treasures. A film that nearly bankrupted MGM became, decades later, one of the most beloved stories in human history. The real curse of The Wizard of Oz wasn't ghosts or mysteries. It was the fact that its beauty was built on suffering. Its joy was carved out of pain. And yet, that contradiction is exactly what makes it unforgettable. The wizard behind the curtain wasn't magic. It was Hollywood itself, harsh, demanding, and ruthless. But somehow, from all that darkness, came a film filled with light. And maybe that's the greatest secret of Oz. That sometimes, the hardest journeys, the most painful struggles, create the most lasting magic. So when Dorothy clicks her heels and whispers, "There's no place like home," it isn't just a line. It's a reminder of everything the cast and crew endured to bring that moment to life. The Wizard of Oz wasn't supposed to last. It stumbled at the box office, scarred its actors, and nearly collapsed in chaos. And yet, through tragedy, risk, and a little bit of Hollywood sorcery, it became eternal. The Yellow Brick Road didn't just lead Dorothy to Oz. It led a film from disaster to immortality. And that's why, more than 80 years later, we're still following it. If you enjoyed this countdown and want to see more epic movie moments brought to life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the greatest stories ever told.